CERB, or the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, is an emergency financial aid program that was created by the national government in order to assist employed or recently employed Canadians who may be struggling financially as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic situation and any subsequent shutdowns that may have occurred as a result. Its overall intent has been to help average Canadians afford their bills while they're experiencing some kind of income hiatus or reduction. Despite this, many have insisted that the CERB fund hasn't been enough and have been documented in many different articles complaining of their financial struggles. But did you know that the CERB fund is significantly higher than any other form of social assistance that's ever been available in Canada? How is it that the government has determined that the average Canadian needs at least $500 a week to get by, but hasn't also determined that those who qualify for assistance need that much to get by as well? I'll be discussing all that and more today on ALifeLearned, so stick around to learn more.
An idea
can escape.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Hello, my name is Becca and this is my channel ALifeLearned. As someone who's currently on Ontario Disability and who has previously relied on Ontario Works, I know firsthand how difficult it is to try and subsist on the little amounts that are provided on different social assistance programs. So when I learned that the CERB benefit was announced to be over $800 more than what I'm allotted on disability each month, I couldn't help but wonder where they were getting their numbers from. So I started doing some research to learn more about CERB and the various different social assistance programs. But to keep the math simple, I just compared a single adult with no dependents for various different programs. So as you can see from the chart here, we have 6 different programs to compare with CERB. There's Ontario Works or Welfare, Ontario Disability Support Program, and then when it comes to seniors, the Canadian Pension Plan, the disability version of the pension plan, Old Age Security, and the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Of these 6 programs, you can see that the highest benefit any Ontarian can receive is from the Canadian Disability Pension Plan, but still, they're only allotted $346 per week rather than the $500 that's provided with CERB. And yet, as I already mentioned, countless Canadians have insisted that this $500 a week hasn't been enough, if not because of the increased food costs as a result of the pandemic, then most certainly because of the increased housing costs that Canadians have been facing for years now. And what I'm trying to put into perspective here is if average Canadians are struggling this much with $500 a week, imagine how much those on assistance have been struggling with much less than that, not just because of the pandemic, but on a day-to-day basis. Can you really say that it seems humane or reasonable that the average disabled person has to live off of $286 a week, or that the average person between jobs has to live off of $183 per week? Now yes, I know that the amount provided with CERB was intended to account for the increased costs as a result of the pandemic, but why then did they not provide similar help to those who are on social assistance who are obviously facing increased costs as well? The best they did was an additional $100 benefit that people had to specifically request and is no longer available despite costs still being higher as a result of the pandemic. And yes, I know there's a tax deduction of $200 for every CERB payment you get, but that still leaves a total of $1,800, which is significantly higher than any other social assistance that is available within Ontario. Prime Minister Trudeau himself has said that the purpose of CERB was to provide temporary financial support to help Canadians pay for their food and rent. But funny enough, pandemic aside, this is basically the purpose that Ontario Works is supposed to fulfill within Ontario on a day-to-day basis, and yet they receive less than half of the CERB amount. Now I realize CERB is provided by the national government and Ontario Works is provided by the provincial government, but even when we just focus on the social assistance programs provided by the national government, as we previously saw, they still don't compare to the amount provided with CERB. What's more, despite many social assistance programs being designed to help people in very specific circumstances, much like CERB, historically they've had exceptionally more difficult application processes. With CERB, it seemed to be a simple matter of a few clicks and next thing you know you have a check in the mail, whereas with many other social programs there's a huge pile of paperwork and many barriers that a lot of people have to get help from advocates in order to overcome. So in the end, I'm left with 3 questions. Who is deciding these amounts and application processes? What are they using in order to make these decisions? And why are these programs so different despite their overall purposes seeming relatively similar? And with a bit of research, I found that the CERB benefit was decided on by the Minister of Employment and Social Development with approval from the Minister of Finance because it's a national program, whereas any decisions related to provincial programs are made by the Minister of Community and Social Services. But despite my best attempts at research, I couldn't find anywhere within the Ontario or Canadian legislation where it indicates how they come up with the amounts that they do, or what data they're using to design the programs that they create. Though I did learn that the legislation that outlines how Ontario Works and Ontario Disability function hasn't been updated since it was first created in 1997. Since that year, the average inflation rate has been about 1.9%, but despite that, the Conservatives only decided to increase social assistance amounts by 1.5% in 2019. And just to put into perspective how this is an issue, that year the inflation rate was actually 2.25%. Thus, the math clearly shows that the legislation is long overdue for an update, and the amounts allotted each year don't meet up with inflation rates, let alone help people properly cover their day-to-day living costs. But despite your opinion on whether social assistance programs should provide more or not, I think we can all agree that as tax-paying citizens, we have a right to clear and easy access to the information that ministers are using to design these social programs. What statistics or data is behind justifying the $2,000 amount for CERB? And what data is being used to justify that someone who is disabled can reasonably afford housing with only $497 a month? I genuinely believe we have a right to this information, and thus I'm going to be personally writing my local MP, as well as the Canadian Minister of Employment and Social Development and the Ontario Minister of Community and Social Services to inquire why this information isn't more easily available to the public. And with this, I encourage you to write the ministers and your local MP as well. We do have every right to this information, and it's through taking acts like these that real change happens. So again, I encourage you to be the change you want to see in the world through expressing your concerns and making them known. Though if you do know where to find these numbers online, please be so kind as to share in the comments. But otherwise, let me know what you thought of the various differences I pointed out between the programs in CERB, and what you thought of how CERB affected your life in general. And then, as always, please do join me again next week or sometime soon, where I try again to share a little something I've learned or experienced in life.